Hey guys, so today I want to talk about a book called The Princess Pact by Melanie Cellier. This is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and it goes into following Princess Marie and Crown Prince William, the heirs to the throne of Northelm, which is one of the 4 countries in her fairy tale retelling world. We start off with Princess Marie. She's in a council meeting, she's bored, and refugees from a village show up stating that a strange man had come into their village and convinced their youngsters to rebel and to join this rebellion that he has going against the kingdom. And the older generation can't figure out why anybody would want to rebel because they don't have anything to complain about the kingdom. The king's nice, he takes care of his people, he's a good king. So they're not really sure what's, going on or how, and they claim that it's a bewitchment. And there's a young gentleman among the group who was not bewitched, and he did go to the rebel camp once, and he couldn't quite understand why everybody was following, but he also wasn't from Northelm. He was a Landoverian, I think is how you pronounce it. And he stated that he went one night and he never felt the need to go back again, and it seemed really odd the way that everybody wanted to go. And so the king asks this young gentleman, Rafe, if he wouldn't mind going back to the camp and spying and letting them know, leaving them a more detailed map at the village, how to get to the camp so that they can, come save their young people, figure out what they're going to do. And so Rafe agrees and he leaves. Well, unfortunately for Princess Marie, her brother decides that he's going to follow, and he manages to get about a half day's head start out of everybody. Like, nobody knows he's gone until his best friend goes to find him and can't find him, shows up at Marie's door and says, hey, your brother's gone. So then Marie decides that she has to do something. So she goes to her mother, who, when the rebel leader was described the day before, had a really odd reaction. And so Marie went to her and told her that William was gone. And that's when her mother revealed that Marie was not a princess. She was not the biological child of the king and queen. She was part of a bargain that had been made with a monster. Marie's mother was the miller's daughter who supposedly spun straw into gold. What actually had happened was that her father had boasted a little too much when he got into his cups, and he ended up getting in trouble because the king didn't like the boastful nature. And so Marie's mom was put into a tower and told that she had to spin the straw into gold in one night, or she was going to end up in the dungeons. And so she cried out for help. This monster showed up, made a bargain with her. Now, she had negotiated the bargain pretty well in her own advantage. He had wanted her to raise his child as her own, and she had agreed to that, but he had to wait until she had provided an heir to the throne first, because she knew, the deal was if she did spin the straw into gold, she was going to marry the prince. So he agreed. Had an amulet that turned the straw into gold for her. The king used that gold to buy food from Landover to help his people because they were having a severe drought. And she married the prince. They had a son. And then the following year, they went away to a cabin where the monster dropped off his daughter, Marie, for her to raise as part of their deal. So when she reveals this to Marie, Marie is upset, betrayed, but it kind of justifies her feelings that she's had her whole life, that she's not a princess. Like, she's always struggled to be a princess. She doesn't feel like she looks like, but she's too tall, her eyes are too pale, her hair's not golden, it's a paler blonde, her skin's too pale. She just doesn't feel like she lives up to what a princess is supposed to look like. And this makes her feel like she's justified in that feeling because, oh, well, I'm not really a princess. And so in a fit of anger and hurt, she packs up and leaves and decides that she's going to track down her brother, go to the rebel camp, and find her real father, who is this monster. Well, she doesn't even make it out of the city before she gets attacked by thieves, and a young boy actually ends up saving her life by calling the guards to rescue her. Of course, none of the guards recognize her, and she's able to get out of the city before anybody realizes who she is or that she's gone. And she walks to the village, which she knows where the village is, and then she spends the night in the village, finds the map that Rafe had left behind for the king and his guards, memorizes it, puts it back where she found it, and walks to the rebel camp. When she gets there, it's not really set up very well. Like, they're doing some sword practicing, but nobody seems to be very proficient. There's no guard system set up, no security. The only reason she stopped is because someone shoots an arrow at her. And then, of course, she gets kind of surrounded by some of the recruits, and one of them, Peter, asks her who she is, and he seems pretty hostile, and she's like, oh, well, I'm friend of Rafe's. He told me to come. He was telling me about this place and was suggesting that I join, and, you know, I finally considered it and decided to come. And so then, of course, someone goes to get Rafe, and he comes in, and he recognizes her immediately as the princess, but just, you know, decides to play along, and is like, oh, yeah, we're old friends. And she shares a pallet with Lisa, which was one of the girls from the Greenwood village, and Lisa's brother Danny was the one who shot the arrow, and he seems to be the only one who's really concerned about security in this place. And so as they sit there talking, and she's trying to find out more about the monster, her father, and her mother had told her that she had tried to renegotiate the bargain after they had received Marie, and had tried to get him to leave Marie with them forever and never come and take her. And his agreement was that if she could figure out what his real name was, his true name, then he would let her keep Marie, but he only gave her 3 days, and she never did figure it out, even though she told Marie that she'd been looking for his real name for years and had never given up. But to Marie, that didn't matter. Her heart was broken because they hadn't loved her enough in her mind to tell her the truth. So now she was kind of in a limbo. She kept calling them the king and queen in her mind instead of mom and dad, mother and father. But she didn't quite see the rebel leader as her father yet either, because she hadn't even met him yet. And so when he finally did come back, he just seemed like he noticed her immediately. He knew who she was immediately. He picked her right out of the crowd, and he pulled her aside, and he revealed that he knew who she was. He'd been keeping an eye on her, and he had placed her in the king and queen's care on purpose. And he took her to his own personal cabin, and that's where he kind of revealed to her that there was a method behind his madness of this plotting. He was the oldest son of a North Helmian king, and was supposed to be the heir to the throne and the next king, and ended up losing his throne to his younger brother, which her adopted father's line now descended from. And so in his mind, he was the rightful heir, and she was his heir. And so he had decided he was going to build up this rebellion, and he was going to put her on the throne, because no one was going to follow him. He looked weird. He was short, and his skin was leathery, and he didn't look quite right. There was just something off about him. And every time he smiled and he laughed, and he had this weird giggle, it never seemed to reach his eyes. There just seemed to be something off. But he seemed genuinely happy to see Marie, and was proud of her, and wanted her to be a leader. And so it kind of led into where he told her that he was building this rebellion for her, to put her on the throne. And she wanted to tell Rafe, but she didn't know how, and she was afraid that as soon as he found out that she was R, which is what he went by R. She was R's daughter, that Rafe would hate her, would not trust her, wouldn't want anything to do with her, and so she kept it to herself. At the same time, she realized that William hadn't shown up. Like, he wasn't in the rebel camp. He wasn't hiding in the village of Greenwood. He wasn't there. And Rafe admitted that he felt like he'd been followed until he almost reached camp, and then it disappeared. And so she was kind of worried that something had happened to William, but William was a tough guy, and he had his own squad, and he was pretty capable. So she figured that, there was nothing that William couldn't do, so he'd be fine. Back at the palace, the queen was covering for both her children. She told everybody that they were sick. The king and queen didn't want anyone to worry or start fretting or think that, oh, the crown prince is missing, what are we going to do, kind of thing, when a delegation from Ragmere shows up. And Evelyn is with the delegation, and if you have read the other books, you know that Evelyn's from the previous novel. She's a friend and personal guard of Queen Ava, and they had just defeated this lord who had a stone that actually ended up enchanting people, and they had cracked the stone, but it still, you know, it could still enchant people, apparently only young people now. And they told her, they came to warn the king and queen that this lord had escaped into Northelm with the stone, and that they were there to offer their assistance. And Queen Ava wanted to let them know that if they needed anything, if they needed an army to fight this person, that they were more than welcome to call upon her, and she would provide her services. She wanted to be a friend. And the king and queen were appreciative, but now they were worried, like, what are they supposed to do? So one of the things that Rafe had been doing was he was getting notes back to the king by going to Greenwood when he would go hunting and sticking them under a stone, and the king would send him responses. And what they ended up, so when they told Rafe about the stone, so now it was kind of one of those things where, like, okay, well, Marie, you need to find out if he has the stone, where he has, you know, get more information on that. So now Marie had to pretend like she was interested in ruling. And so she had been avoiding him. He went off on another recruiting mission. She kind of avoided him. Peter got a little punchy. There was a point there where when he had kind of, how do I say this? He had challenged Rafe to a fight, and Rafe had fought and defeated him, like really well defeated him, kicked his butt. It was awesome. And demoralized him and made him feel, you know, humiliated him in front of everybody. And then Rafe had whispered to him, and you don't find this out till later, but Rafe had whispered to him that if he ever laid a hand on Marie, he was dead. And so R comes back, Marie asks him about the gem, and he actually shows it to her. He's wearing it, and he says the fool that he had given it to before had worn it outside his clothes so that everybody could see like a moron, and unfortunately that guy had died when he brought it back, and he brought it back broken, and he kind of reveals that he's, you know, 400 years old, and he used all these enchantments and stuff to prolong his life, and that godmothers were the reason that he didn't get what he wanted, and that, you know, not everybody they portrayed as the villain was the villain, and really started to make her kind of doubt, you know, godmothers, and doubt her loyalties, and she felt bad for him and was like, well, you know, why does the king get to be the king? And kind of started to question herself, and it was a really like odd moment for her where she was just having an identity crisis. And she went into the forest to kind of think, and ran into Peter and a couple of cronies beating up Rafe. And when she, you know, intervened and stopped them, Peter actually charged at her and snatched her bow and arrow from her hands. And Rafe, you know, of course, beat the crap out of him and told him that he was to leave immediately, or he was going to kill him. And so he did. He left. And she struggled because now she was falling for Rafe, like actually falling in love with him. And she didn't know how to tell him that she was falling in love with him. And on top of that, she knew, you know, having the identity crisis, R had left her in charge of the camp. And so and that's when, you know, her and Rafe had decided, okay, well, the longer he's away from camp, the less the enchantment sticks. So we need to distract them from being rebels. And so she organized a dance for them. But one of the things that she struggled with was what to do. Like, was she going to lead? Because she really enjoyed being the leader of the camp. So was she going to lead these rebels and take over the kingdom, or was she going to stay loyal to her parents? And that's when her fairy godmother showed up. And it was a grandmotherly woman who was like, oh yeah, I was there at your christening. And she said, but I'm not a princess. Why do I have a fairy godmother? And the fairy godmother said, well, not everybody who's born in a palace deserves to be in a palace. And not everybody who's born in a woodcutter shed deserves to be in a woodcutter shed. And that kind of led the fairy godmother to leading her to her ultimate decision, which was that the High King never did things lightly. And there was a reason that her father was not made the King of Northelm 400 years ago. And to find the answer that she's, you know, was seeking, she needed to look back in the past and look at the story from the beginning. And it really the discussion with the fairy godmother really kind of helped her figure out what she needed to do. And she knew that she needed to save her people and free them from the evil that was her father. And so she organized a dance to kind of distract them and get them so focused on other things that they wouldn't be focused on fighting. And that worked until R showed back up. And he came back, and her and Rafe, of course, at this point had shared like a really precious moment. But she did admit to him who she was. Like, she told him everything, told him all of her secrets. And he told her that he still cared about her and he wasn't upset, but he needed time to process, and he disappeared. And then the following morning, he asked her to meet him in the clearing where Peter had beat him up. And when they got to the clearing, R was already there with Peter, telling Peter that he couldn't fail him and he couldn't believe, what he had done, and making just all kinds of boastful proclamations, also revealing that he was keeping William captive in his cave. And so now she knew for a fact where her brother was. And she told Rafe that they had to save him, and they had to save the kids, and the only way to do that was to go to her father and tell him everything. So they started off, they didn't even go back to camp, they just took off towards Greenwood Village, got there, and that's when they found a missive from her father stating that they were coming to the encampment, because R had already made it to the city of Northgate, and had already taken all of the youngsters from Northgate. So now they really needed to stop him. And she needed to go interfere because she had to stop her. And the problem they were running into was that Ragmere had offered their soldiers. Well, R's whole plan hinged on the fact that the Northelmians wouldn't attack their own children. But the Ragmerians, these aren't their children. They have no connection to them. So of course they're going to attack them if they want to. And if a rebel raises a sword, of course they're going to fight them. And these kids have no decent training. They don't know what they're doing. Like, yes, Marie had gotten more proficient at using a bow and arrow, and she had gotten some proficiency in knives, but she wasn't a fighter. None of them were fighters. The only one who was a fighter was Rafe. And so they had to stop him. And of course, that's when they were told that they ended up, and that's when they were told, come to find out that the only way to break it was to have his name. So they go back to the camp, and everybody's coming out of a meeting, and they're getting ready to fight because the soldiers are coming. So her and Rafe go to his cavern because R has disappeared. Go to his cavern, find his, find a chest, nothing in it. Go through these other tunnels, come to another cavern of another chest. Rafe gets stuck by magic ink. She finds William being kept in a cell. William gets himself out with a knife. They end up going through all of these books because, again, what's going to break the enchantment on Rafe is his name. And so they start looking. She finds a book of fairy tales. It's old ones. She finds a fairy tale that she's never heard before about 3 brothers. And there's his name, Rumpelstiltskin. She says it. The enchantment on Rafe completely disappears. They start heading out of the caverns. Her brother says the name again. It kills the cavern. The cavern caves in. So then they have to go the other way. Unfortunately, because her brother had said the name, all the caves start caving in. And her and Rafe and her brother get separated. And, of course, at this time, she's told her brother the truth about her paternity. And it doesn't change the way he feels about her. He still loves her. She's still his sister. And she comes to realize that her parents picked her even though they didn't birth her. That they loved her even though she wasn't biologically theirs. And so she gets out and finds the 2 armies against each other, getting ready to attack. Peter at the forefront. She runs forward, screams Rumpelstiltskin's name, and the enchantment drops on everybody. And Peter, of course, now all the kids are confused because, why are we here? What's going on? Well, then Peter reveals that, tries to trick them into fighting. And it's like, oh, they're going to fight us. Defend yourselves. They're going to attack. And she manages to get Danny's attention in the tree, and he shoots Peter in the arm. Of course, then that leaves Peter wanting to attack her, and she manages to defend herself, gets his other arm. They take him away. Her father happens to be there against his advisor's wishes, and of course they reconcile. She manages to then get engineers and Ferdy, her brother's best friend, to help her get her brother and Rafe out of the caves. And when they get back, Rumpelstiltskin shows up and has her father at knife point and basically wants to kill him and put her on the throne regardless. And this is his revenge for 400 years. And she manages to, Rafe manages to shoot Rumpelstiltskin's hand with a bow and arrow. Her father drops out of the way, and then after a quick battle between him and Rumpelstiltskin, he manages to stab him and kill him. And it kind of just wraps it all up at that point where it's one of those things where it's like, okay, and her brother kind of sees that there's something between her and Rafe. And that turns into kind of being like, well, I wish we could be together, but I'm a princess and I've chosen my family, so I have to marry for, an allegiance. And then he reveals, well, I haven't been 100% honest with you. I'm actually, and he has this really long name, he's the third prince of Lanover. When he said he was a third son, he didn't mention the fact that he was the third son of the king and queen, and that, yes, they can marry. And so then that just completely changes her whole entire outlook, because she was just like, I thought that I wasn't going to get to marry you, and I wasn't going to get to be with the person I loved. And we never do find out if her father was going to let her marry him or not, even if he wasn't a prince. Like, before her father could answer, he kind of interrupts and he's like, just to kind of boost your decision, I'm a prince, FYI. Like, I wanted to make my own way. And so it's just hilarious and cute and adorable the way that they end up, and she ends up on the right path, and she ends up where she's supposed to be. And it was such a cute story. I loved it. So if you're looking for a really fun read, The Princess Pact by Melanie Cellier. It's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and it is super fun. Happy reading!